Okay, in this video I want to talk about some of the modifications that happen in the female near 9 months worth of pregnancy. So the way I want to start out in this model, I want to talk about the structures of the uterus. So we're looking here at the main uterus and of course holding the fetus, which is approximately 9-month fetus. I'm going to remove the fetus from the model and we will see that now we can see the wall of the uterus itself, the muscle wall known as the myometrium. That's kind of this brownish red color here. And then the pink represents the endometrial layer of the uterus. But mostly what I want to focus on in this case is this somewhat purple structure in the background, which represents the placenta. Okay, keeping in mind the placenta is made up partially of tissue from the mother and partially from tissue from the fetus. Now, one of the other things we see when we're reaching 9-month term pregnancy is that this uterus has gotten very, very, very large. So we need to consider all of the abdominal contents and the fact that in this area, normally we would have seen small intestine. All of that small intestine and the associated viscera are being pushed up into the abdominal cavity and basically pushed up against the bottom of the diaphragm and the liver. So this would also explain a little bit why pregnant women can have a little bit of trouble with breathing and things like that, depending on the position they're standing in, because what was abdominal viscera to fill a normal abdominal cavity is all pushed up against the inferior surface of that diaphragm. Okay, so now we have zoomed in to the area which represents basically the area of the true pelvis. I want to go back over some of the structures that we see in the female reproductive system, keeping in mind this is the pubic symphysis and this is the sacrum and the coccyx. Female reproductive structures that we can see that really haven't changed very much. We can see the labia majora and we can see the labia minora. We can see the beginning of the vaginal canal, and we can see the glans clitoris right below the pubic symphysis. Structures that have been modified because this is a 9-month pregnant female include the urinary bladder, and it hasn't really been modified very much as that it has been squished. We know that the urinary bladder should be right behind the pubic symphysis, and this little line that we see right here represents the urinary bladder in the pregnant female. And this late into pregnancy, what we see is that this entire uterus with the fetus is sitting on top of the urinary bladder, which makes it very hard to fill the urinary bladder, which means it can explain why the female urinates frequently when she's pregnant. Now, what we need to notice on this model is this little line right here is the urogenital diaphragm. So from that line up, all of that is urinary bladder. From the line down would be the urethra of the female. So we can see that urinary bladder is definitely being squished by the uterus. Another structure we need to take into account is back here, the rectum, and maybe a little bit of the anus, but mostly the rectum, where the rectum is now wedged in between that very large uterus with the fetus and the sacrum and a little bit of the coccyx. And because this rectum is being pushed on by this uterus, it is not uncommon for pregnant women to experience some constipation because it's very hard to squeeze the fecal matter through the colon when it's wedged in between this uterus and the sacrum. On the same token, the venous return from around the anus needs to go back up through that same area, and it also would be squished between the uterus and the sacrum. So it's not uncommon for that venous return to kind of get trapped into some sinuses down around the anus, which are known as hemorrhoidal sinuses. And they're actually cavernous sinuses, and when they inflame, they become hemorrhoids. So it's not uncommon for pregnant women to also get hemorrhoids. Now, other things we can see in this model, this is the vaginal canal, and we've seen before an anterior fornix and a posterior fornix of the vaginal canal. At 9 months pregnancy, just before delivering the fetus, these anterior and posterior fornixes will be somewhat exaggerated because the uterus is starting now to press down into that area. And here we can see the very beginning of the dilation of the cervix. So this is very near the time of birth.